Next, we have Vera Kaelin. She's a doctoral student in rehabilitation science at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She deposited the study that I mentioned, Early Intervention Colorado, Participant Characteristics, Service Use, and Patient-Reported Outcomes in 2019, so that was one of our more recent releases. She and Dr. Mary Katani also presented an overview of this study with us in CLDR at a workshop in Chicago at the ACRM Spring Institute this past year. And they also took part in the webinar that I mentioned with the Boston Rise study, so that's available online.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to present on behalf of our team who got CLDR funding to archive 2 data sets that are related to early intervention and that hopefully contribute to accelerating rehabilitation-relevant research in the field of early intervention. This is our team. We are a diverse, multi-site team of academics and also community partners. And what we have in common is that we share an interest in the passion of children, young children, infants and toddlers, and their families as they progress through early intervention services. We got a R03 grant to look at how service use might be related to outcomes that matter. And outcomes that matter to providers, to policymakers, but also, and most importantly, to families that navigate through that system of care. In this R03 project, there are 2 aims, and each resulting in 1 data set. So the first aim is, or the first data set contains record abstraction data, so data of families that have traversed through early intervention services already and that were discharged between 2014 and 2016. Then the second data set is a combination of that service record abstraction data combined with primary data collection done online. And those were families that were enrolled in early intervention services at that time, more specifically between 2017 and 2018. And I'm going to take you through a quick tour of these 2 data sets now, and then I'm going to talk about the process that we went through when archiving the data sets. And I can say already that that was a really good experience. I really agree with you what you were saying. It was fantastic. So our first aim of the R03 project was to look at factors that are related to service access and service use in early intervention. And at that time, there was growing evidence showing that there are disparities in access and service use in early intervention, but the data that was used to build that evidence was limited to local and state data sources, and it was also limited in terms of information on clinical characteristics, such as a child's functional capabilities that can be an indicator for service use. And at that time, there was also an advancement in early intervention services towards state-mandated outcomes reporting that was done to improve quality or improve accountability in the systems nationally. And that allowed us to build a data set that included this information on, for example, on a child's functional capabilities, and that helped us then to look at trends and correlates of service use and service intensity. In this first data set, we had around 2,000 families involved, and all the data that we have in this data set is all from record abstraction. These are elements of the dataset 1 that we have mapped to the ICF framework. And as you can see, we have variables, and these are just examples. We have variables on the child's personal factors, such as the child's primary language spoken at home, the child's race and ethnicity, or the child's age. And we have information on the child's functional capabilities. These are those state-mandated outcomes that I was talking about before. And we have them from the provider perspective, and we have them from early intervention service entry and early intervention service exit. Then we have information on the child's developmental status. And that's important in early intervention because that's an indicator for service eligibility. So these two sets of variables are indicators for service need. Then we have variables on service use itself. So we have variables on the serve amount in terms of hours, the service duration in terms of month, the service type that they got, and the service intensity. Then, as you in the second data set, maybe you've reckoned here in the first data set, there are some of the ICF domains captured and others are missing. And that's what we were trying to do with the second data set. So here we're trying to capture also information on the child's participation and the child's functional performance. And we did that with two assessment tools that are electronic, so that capture data electronically, and they're new to early intervention. One is the PDCAT, which is the Pediatric Evaluation of Disability Inventory Computer Adaptive Test that captures the child's functional performance. And then we have the Young Child's Participation and Environment Measure, the YCPEM, that captures the child's participation in valued activities in home and community. For this data set, we had about 150 families enrolled, and we had the service record abstraction data paired with the newly collected data. And because we had the two data coming together, we could look at how service use is related to functional outcomes such as participation. So these data, the newly collected data, are all from the caregiver perspective, which is different to what we had in the first data set. Now, for the second data set, we had the same variables as we had in the first data set because we had the record abstraction. But now we also had additional data to that, which is, as I said, on participation of a child and on functional performance of the child. While this data set is smaller in terms of how many families were enrolled, it's larger in terms of what type of variables are captured. So that's why we think these two data sets that we archived are a really good resource to use again and to look at rehabilitation relevant research questions. And that's why we shared those data sets. One way to approach this could be by looking at the question how a child's home participation need differs by service type, such as occupational therapy or physical therapy. Now, as I said, the process of partnering with ICPSR to archive these data sets was a really great opportunity and a great experience for us. I was mainly involved in the second data set that was archived, and I'm going to talk about this experience because I can best talk about the experience I was involved in, of course. And we started in January 2019 by cleaning and organizing the data set and then selecting variables that we wanted to share that we think make sense to share. We created additional metadata. And in this process, Shane Redman and his team at ICPSR was a really great resource with any question that we had, more questions around the metadata, for example, but also very simple questions of uploading the data. And that made it that we were ready to transfer the data and all the documents that we had to ICPSR in April 2019. And then most of the work was done by them. So they were bringing all the documents in the standardized formats. They were helping us deciding on what variables that we need to share in a more restricted mode. And then in October 2019, the dataset was ready to be shared. And that allowed us, as Shane mentioned before, to co-present with ICPSR, but also with our CLDR mentor, James Graham, at the ACRM spring meeting. And we were able to also be part of this webinar of ICPSR last fall. And we hope that these two presentations increased the uptake of our two data sets, but we also hope that it raised awareness for other researchers to share the data and to advance the field of rehabilitation, but also early intervention forward. While we were working on the archiving, we were also working on publications with this data set. And because, or with the data that we had on the state-mandated outcomes on a child's functional capabilities, colleagues could look at the relationship between diagnostic, social, and functional characteristics of the child and their service use. And they could establish evidence that showed that the child's race and ethnicity, the child's language spoken at home, and the child's age was related to whether they received service or not, or how much service they would receive. Now, because the statement and outcomes data was there of the record abstraction from entry and exit of early intervention services, there was also the possibility to look at what impact that a child and family characteristics and service use intensity had on the change of the child's activity competence. And colleagues could establish evidence showing that higher service intensity and a higher age of the child had a better impact on the change of the child's activity competence level. And this is actually a really nice example of secondary data analysis, because the second study wasn't originally planned, and with the data that was there, it allowed to do more than that was actually planned from the beginning on. Now, with the second data set, we did studies that, of course, included now the primary data collection and the service abstraction data. And I will highlight one of them, which is the first one mentioned here, is we could look at the relationship between early intervention service use and participation. And with having this relationship established, we could also show that the environmental support was a mediator in this relationship, which is actually very similar to what you were talking about. Yeah. Now, when we look at the interest of the data sets, as Shane was mentioned, our data sets were recently released. We're not up to 2,000 yet, but we're working on it. We have, for the first data set, 37 downloads, and for the second data set, 15 downloads. And what was very promising is, at the webinar last fall, there was interest mentioned in using our data set and collaborating with us, and we really look forward to see where that goes. When I look back to this process, I think there are 3 key lessons learned, or 3 key benefits for me with working with data sharing. One of the main things I would say was gaining skills in data management. And I think I'm in my PhD right now, and getting into the habit of doing transparent research early on in my PhD was a really good experience also, I think, in terms of quality of my work and future quality of my work. And all the skills that I learned through that data sharing project, I can now apply also to a very similar data set that I'm working with for my dissertation now. And I'm sure I can use that skill a lot more in future too. Now, the second topic is connected to ethical responsibility. And what I mean with this is, before I started working with this project, I was not so much aware of data sharing, and I was in particular not aware of how much data is out there. And I was talking to Shane and Matt yesterday about that. This made me contact the head of the master program I was enrolled in before starting my PhD, and to encourage her to put that into the curriculum, because I think master students should know about this treasure out there, because they're going to be future researchers and they could possibly use that in their dissertation as well. Then the third point is connected to workload. And I would say I'm really impressed how little workload it is to archive a data set. I did not expect that it's so little, because a lot of the work that I was doing, I would have had to do anyway to work with the data set, right? The cleaning and all that, that's the biggest part, and you have to do that anyway. So that was really great to see, and there was so much support from your side that it made it really easy. And I would say I would do it right away, again, if I could. So with this, thank you very much. If you have any questions, happy to answer. Yeah?
I was just going to make a comment anyway, because it was nice that you showed the slide where you matched up your measures to the ICF model. So I have a slide like that, which I didn't end up showing, which we hit all the measures of the ICF. We were designed also around the ICF model. And my comment earlier about disability, I think it would be important to maybe have a search term on studies that are conceptualized around the ICF, only because now it's becoming such a priority of the WHO. It's going to be part of ICD-11, where people are going to have to code within, for function based on the ICF. And so I think it'll be helpful if there are data sets that match up to that. It could really accelerate some of this research.
Yeah, I agree. That would be nice also in terms of comparability, what's there, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.